Hi, everyone. Welcome to our persuasive speech unit. You've made it through your briefing speech. You've made it through most of your teamwork for the semester. And now we're focusing on how do we persuade people? How do we convince them to be on our side or not? How do we make lasting change and not just momentary change? And there are a couple different kind of technical things involved in this unit. So I really encourage you, if you haven't watched the reading before you haven't done the reading before you're watching this video, I would suggest reading it first and then following along with this video and any of the other resources in this unit. The goal of persuasive speaking is to influence our audience members. So that doesn't even necessarily mean that we need them to agree with us or we need them to take immediate action. Sometimes those are our desires and our goals, but sometimes influence is just planting a seed and getting people to think about something, even if it kind of takes root and grows later on. They may think, oh yeah, I remember 10 years ago, I gave a speech about climate change, and now here I am trying to figure out how I can be better at recycling or how I can purchase a more sustainable car that maybe I wouldn't have considered at the time, but I do remember them telling me something, and that's influencing me now. And then again, there will be people that disagree with you that you may influence by at least getting them to think about the other side, even if it doesn't change their mind. And that's okay. And one of the things that we can focus on is attitudes, another's belief, values, and actions. We've talked about all of those already this semester in pieces, but remember that our attitudes are going to be kind of in the moment. How do we feel about a topic? Our beliefs and values are much harder to change than our attitudes. And then, of course, it takes a lot to call someone to action, to give a speech and then actually get them to do something. But those are the most powerful speeches. What is our motivation for persuasion? Use information from your audience analysis. Personalize the message so that you're going to best persuade those listeners. If I wanted to convince a bunch of baby boomers that the minimum wage needs to be raised, for example, I need to do my research with them in mind, not with Gen Z in mind, not with the greatest generation in mind, right? Not anybody in between. I need to think about who I'm going to be talking to, right? And then, of course, sometimes the information just isn't relevant to your audience. If you know you're going to be speaking to a third grade classroom, you really just don't need to talk to them about TurboTax. Like, nothing is going to stick. It's not going to matter for a number of years. And you're not going to have a lot of trouble persuading them, or they will blindly agree with you and know nothing about the topic, particularly with third graders. You also want to be able to demonstrate the benefit of whatever it is that you're trying to convince them to do or not to do. And also that simultaneously will establish your credibility. So you're saying, I know these things about this. Here's why you should quit smoking. Here are the benefits of quitting smoking. And then most importantly, set modest goals. You're not going to start a revolution overnight, but you can, again, kind of plant the seed of whatever it is that you're focused on. Appeal to what motivates audience members, encourage them, and recognize what already motivates them and what they need from you to even consider change, right? Change is really tough, particularly when people feel like they have to give something up to get something else. And so you just need to make sure that you are doing your very best to emphasize the benefits while also still giving them the full truth. Persuasion happens through the 3 persuasive appeals, which we've talked about both in the book and in lecture: ethos, pathos, and logos. Remember that ethos is speaker credibility. We're talking about moral character, trustworthiness. Are you the person that has done the research and is credible to give this speech. The more credible you come off, the more likely they are to listen, and thus the more likely they are to be persuaded. In all of the speech outlines that you've done so far, or speech outline-esque activities, you've been asked for a statement of credibility. What makes you credible to give this speech? You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to be the expert in the room, right? You all haven't graduated yet. You don't have your degree yet. But if you're an engineering student in a room full of creative writing majors, you're the expert in the room on engineering. That being said, if you're a creative writing major in a room full of creative writing majors, you have to have expertise on what you're talking about and be prepared to answer questions from people who have the information to fight back. Pathos, that's our appeal to emotion. This one is incredibly persuasive if done correctly and can be very detrimental if done poorly. Methods of appealing to pathos include using imagery, telling a good story, using those linguistic style methods that we talked about in the unit before your briefing speeches. And then also base emotional appeals on sound reasoning. You want to have the emotional appeal, but you don't want to surrender your logic for it, right? So this one, I would say, is the easiest to do and come across as genuine if you're concerned that you are lacking in expertise or that you are struggling to find some kind of logical consistency within your argument. We can always rely on people to feel and to be moved by good storytelling or shocking facts and anything that's going to get an emotional response from them if you do it correctly. That's the key. If you tell a story poorly, you're not going to get the same effect as telling it well. Logos is our appeal to reason or logic. Logos, logic. Critical when asking listeners to reach conclusions or take a specific action. This will come into play particularly in your conclusion. You'll give a call to action. You'll remind them of your thesis and your review of points and things like that. So make sure that above all else, when you get to the conclusion, you're setting up a logical next step for them. You've convinced them of your argument. Now what do they need to do? We've got some specific argument elements, and I will make a note here and say I will put an example on Blackboard of these elements separate from this PowerPoint that I think will be helpful in framing this for you a little bit. We have 3 components of an argument: claim, evidence, also called data, and warrant. So you'll either see claim data warrant or claim evidence warrant. The textbook flips back and forth between every edition, but just know that claim and warrant never change, and evidence and data are the same thing. We're just calling them different names, right? So our claim is our conclusion, whatever essentially your thesis, whatever your main point is. Your evidence backs that claim up. So if your claim is we need to have recycling bins at every house in Lubbock, evidence is Lubbock throws away 28,000 tons of plastic every year that could be recycled. And then warrant provides reasons that the evidence is valid. So you'll say throwing away plastic is dangerous for the earth. If we're planning to protect the earth, we need to do a better job of recycling. Lubbock needs to help people recycle, right? So we're completing that circle. Our claim is our argument. Our evidence is our data that we're using to make the argument. The warrant takes that data and connects it back to the claim, and on and on and on. There are a couple different types of claims you can make. The first is a claim of fact. We're declaring something is true. You could say drinking and driving is dangerous. That is a claim of fact. Claim of value addresses issues of judgment. And so you could say for our children, we need to make sure that schools have fine arts programs available. you're valuing children and children's education, and then slipping in the fact that you want fine arts education. And then claim of policy recommends a specific course of action. So this would be, I recommend that we pass House Bill 83. I recommend that we remove so-and-so from office, that we put so-and-so in office, that we make it illegal to drink at a tech football game, that we make it legal to drink at a tech football game. Whatever your claim of policy is, a direct policy change, is, again, subjective in and of itself, right? It's your opinion that this thing should happen, but you're going to back it up with your data or your evidence and your warrant in the argument itself. Different types of evidence or data. External evidence, we've talked a lot about these sources that you need to be citing in your speeches, like facts and statistics and narratives and testimonies. But you can also use the audience's experiences as evidence. And so you can say, I know that this town is really tired of raccoon infestation, and that you believe in Governor so-and-so's ability to protect us, that kind of thing. Appeal to them. Those are our you and we statements, or our town, our state, whatever the context is there. And then speaker expertise. In conjunction with evidence, you can say, I myself was building a bridge and realized that we needed this material instead of plastic. And that's why I ask you to use this material instead of plastic, fellow civil engineers. So however you can work your own kind of expertise and narrative in there. And again, you typically end up using a combination of these. So don't feel like you have to just stick to one. So we've done our claim types, we've done our evidence types, and now we have our warrant types. We have motivational, authoritative, and substantive. Motivational, you're asking them to do something, you're appealing to their emotions, you're basing it on whatever pathos appeal you've made via story or shocking fact or whatever it is. And you're saying, doesn't it hurt to know that there are this many children that go hungry? That is why we, go back to your claim, need to have a food pantry for Lubbock's elementary schools. Authoritative warrants appeal to source credibility. They're based on ethos. Again, you could say something like, I am a civil engineer. I know that this matters to you, that we are spending less than $5,000 on this amount of material. That is why I made claim that we should be replacing blah, 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 blah. And then substantive warrants use factual evidence to justify an argument, kind of similar to evidence, but the distinguishing factor is that we are building the logic that is going to bolster our claim. So data in and of itself is just a fact that you're stating or using to make a point. A substantive warrant is taking that data and putting it into the larger picture of things and saying, here's why this matters. Here's why all these pieces had to fall into place. There are two types of substantive warrants that we consider in this course. Those are warrant by cause, warrant by analogy. Again, cause and effect, pretty typical. You're familiar with that. And then analogy, if you remember from our linguistic styles, is making a comparison through story or anecdote, right? So just something to consider as you move into your persuasive speech. You're not going to outright name all of these persuasive components. You won't say, my claim is blank, and my evidence is blank, and my warrant is blank. But when you're going through your outline and you see that one of them's missing, your argument's probably not as strong as it can be, and it might even be incomplete. So just make sure that you've got all of these things together and ready to go, so that when you are making the argument, it's making that full circle and it's making sense, as opposed to just providing a bunch of evidence but never getting to that warrant, or moving from a claim to the warrant and not having any evidence in between. Or worst of all, forgetting the claim and just throwing a bunch of evidence out there and warrants and never actually explicitly stating what the claim is. That is all from me on this unit. I hope you enjoyed. Please let me know if you have any questions. I am excited to get you all into the kind of persuasive headspace, and I think it's going to be really great. Until then, be well.